Good evening, and welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth, and tonight we are tracking a seismic shift in global trade, a battery breakthrough that could rewrite the future of electric vehicles, and growing tensions in the Middle East. These stories are more connected than you might think, and we're going to pull back the curtain on all of it.
I'm Maya Clarity, and let me tell you, tonight's lead story is one for the history books. The United States Supreme Court just handed the White House a major legal defeat on tariffs, and the ripple effects are already being felt from Shanghai to Silicon Valley. We've also got a scientific development out of China that could reshape the entire energy landscape. Buckle up, because this is going to be a packed show.
Let's also mention we're covering a significant security development out of the Middle East, with the US pulling non-essential staff from its Jerusalem embassy, and a fascinating look at North Korea's political future that has major implications for regional stability. All of that is ahead.
And for our science enthusiasts, we've got a deep dive into cutting-edge neutrino research that could change how we understand fundamental physics. But first, Alex, let's get to the story that's shaking global markets right now.
Absolutely. Let's start with the tariffs, because this is a story about executive power, the rule of law, and billions of dollars in trade hanging in the balance. Breaking news tonight out of Washington. The Supreme Court has struck down the use of emergency powers as the legal basis for President Trump's sweeping global tariffs. This is a landmark ruling that has immediately thrown U.S. trade policy into turmoil, and according to the South China Morning Post, analysts are now predicting a surge of Chinese imports into the United States as companies rush to take advantage of what could be a very narrow window.
Let's be precise about what happened here, Alex. The administration had been using emergency powers to justify broad tariff authority without going through Congress. The court essentially said no, that's not how this works. You can't declare a trade emergency and then use it as a blank check to reshape global commerce. This is a constitutional check on executive overreach, plain and simple.
And the market implications are immediate. Importers across the United States are now expected to front-load goods from China. We're talking about companies that sell products made in China or use Chinese raw materials placing significantly larger orders in the coming weeks. The reasoning is straightforward. Right now, with the legal basis struck down, there's uncertainty about what comes next, and smart businesses are going to move fast.
Here's where it gets interesting from a policy standpoint. The president has already pledged to raise new tariffs, potentially moving from 10% to 15% or higher, but now he has to find a different legal mechanism to do it. That takes time. It requires congressional involvement. And in that gap between the court ruling and whatever new tariff framework emerges, you've got this window where goods can flow more freely. Analysts are calling it a relief window, but I'd call it a scramble.
Let's talk about who benefits and who loses in this scenario. On the surface, American consumers could see some short-term relief. If importers are bringing in more goods at lower tariff rates, that should, in theory, push prices down on everything from electronics to household goods. American retailers who've been squeezed by higher costs could see some breathing room.
But here's the deeper analysis. The companies that benefit most are the ones with the capital and logistics infrastructure to move fast. We're talking about major corporations, the Walmarts and Amazons of the world, that can place massive orders overnight. Small businesses, the ones that were already struggling under the tariff regime, may not have the cash flow or the supplier relationships to take advantage of this window before it closes.
And on the Chinese side, this is a strategic gift. Beijing has been navigating these tariffs for years, and Chinese manufacturers have been diversifying their export markets. But a sudden surge in U.S. orders gives Chinese factories a boost at a time when China's domestic economy has been showing signs of strain. The timing here is critical, because it comes as China is also making major moves in technology and energy, which we'll get to in our next story.
There's also a geopolitical dimension that we can't ignore. This Supreme Court ruling doesn't just affect U.S.-China trade. It affects the entire global tariff architecture that the administration built. If the emergency powers justification is gone, what happens to tariffs on European goods, on Canadian goods, on goods from allies and adversaries alike? This ruling has the potential to unravel a significant portion of U.S. trade policy.
And let's be honest about what this tells us about the state of executive power in America. For years, presidents of both parties have been accumulating trade authority, using national security and emergency declarations to bypass Congress. The court just put a speed bump on that road, and the question now is whether Congress will step up and actually legislate trade policy or whether we'll see another creative legal workaround from the White House.
Follow the money, Alex. That's what I always say. The lobbying that's going to happen in Washington over the next few weeks will be intense. Every industry group, every trade association, every multinational corporation is going to be working the halls of Congress trying to shape whatever comes next. The tariff debate is about to move from the executive branch to the legislative branch, and that means it's about to get a lot messier and a lot more influenced by campaign donations.
Exactly right. And that brings us to our next story, which is directly connected to the global energy competition between the United States and China. Because while Washington is consumed by tariff politics, Chinese scientists may have just achieved a major breakthrough that could reshape the electric vehicle industry worldwide. This is a big one, Maya. Chinese researchers have developed a new battery technology that could potentially double the driving range of electric vehicles. According to reporting from the South China Morning Post, this technology also addresses one of the biggest complaints about EVs, which is their poor performance in cold weather. If this pans out, we're looking at a potential game-changer for the entire automotive industry.
Let's dig into the science here, because the details matter. Current lithium batteries, whether we're talking about lithium iron phosphate or ternary lithium, are approaching what scientists call their energy density ceiling. That's a fancy way of saying we're squeezing about as much power out of these batteries as the current chemistry allows. That's why EV ranges have plateaued. That's why your phone battery life hasn't dramatically improved in years. We've been hitting a wall.
And this new research appears to break through that wall. The Chinese team has been working on next-generation battery chemistry that fundamentally changes the energy density equation. We're not talking about incremental improvements here, Maya. Doubling the range means an EV that currently goes 300 miles on a charge could potentially go 600. That eliminates range anxiety almost entirely for most drivers.
The cold weather performance angle is equally significant, and here's why. One of the biggest barriers to EV adoption in northern climates, whether we're talking about Scandinavia, Canada, or the northern United States, is that lithium batteries lose a substantial portion of their capacity in freezing temperatures. Some EV owners report losing 30 to 40% of their range in winter. If this new technology addresses that problem, it opens up EV adoption to markets that have been resistant.
Now, let's talk about the strategic implications, because this isn't just a science story. This is a geopolitics story. China already dominates the global battery supply chain. Chinese companies produce the majority of the world's lithium-ion batteries, and they control significant portions of the raw material supply chain, from lithium mining to cobalt processing. A breakthrough like this would extend that dominance further.
And here's where I want to connect this back to our tariff story, Alex. The United States has been trying to build a domestic battery industry. The Inflation Reduction Act included massive incentives for US-based battery manufacturing. But if Chinese scientists are leapfrogging the technology, then American companies aren't just competing on cost, they're competing on capability. You can build all the battery factories you want in Michigan and Georgia, but if the Chinese have fundamentally better technology, the competitive gap widens.
This is exactly the kind of strategic technology competition that keeps national security officials up at night. Batteries are not just about cars. They're about energy storage for the grid, about military applications, about the entire clean energy transition. Whoever leads in battery technology has enormous leverage over the future global economy. And right now, this research suggests China is pulling ahead.
Let's also consider the investment implications. If this technology proves scalable and commercially viable, it could trigger a massive reallocation of capital in the global auto industry. Traditional automakers who've been slowly transitioning to EVs might suddenly face pressure to accelerate. Meanwhile, Chinese EV manufacturers like BYD, who already have cost advantages, would gain a technological advantage on top of that. The competitive landscape could shift dramatically.
And we should note that this comes at a moment when the tariff situation we just discussed is in flux. If Chinese EV batteries become significantly better than the competition, the pressure to import them, even with tariffs, becomes enormous. No American consumer is going to choose a car with half the range just because the battery was made domestically. Market forces have a way of overriding trade policy, and this breakthrough could accelerate that dynamic.
There's also an environmental angle that deserves attention. If EVs can go twice as far on a single charge, the argument for switching from gasoline vehicles becomes much stronger. The energy transition that climate scientists say we desperately need could get a major boost from this kind of innovation. But here's the irony, it's happening in China, a country that still relies heavily on coal-fired power plants. The clean energy story is never as simple as we'd like it to be.
Well said. Now let's shift to a developing security situation that underscores just how fragile the geopolitical landscape remains. The U.S. State Department has authorized the evacuation of non-essential staff from the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem.
This is a story that requires careful attention, Alex, because embassy drawdowns are significant diplomatic signals. When the State Department allows non-essential personnel to leave a posting, it means the security assessment has changed materially. This isn't routine. This is the US government telling its own people that conditions on the ground have deteriorated to the point where maintaining a full diplomatic presence carries unacceptable risk.
Let's put this in context. The Jerusalem embassy has been a flashpoint since it was established. The decision to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem was itself a major diplomatic shift. Now, authorizing evacuation suggests that the security environment in and around Jerusalem has reached a level that the State Department considers genuinely dangerous for American personnel.
And this has direct energy implications, which is why it matters for our coverage tonight. The Middle East remains one of the most critical energy-producing regions in the world. Any escalation in tensions, any widening of conflict, sends shockwaves through global oil and gas markets. We've already seen oil prices respond to instability in the region, and a U.S. embassy drawdown is the kind of signal that traders watch very closely.
The broader question is what this tells us about U.S. diplomatic strategy in the region. An evacuation of non-essential staff can be precautionary, or it can be a prelude to something larger. We've seen this pattern before, where embassy drawdowns preceded military escalations or major diplomatic ruptures. The fact that this is happening while the administration is simultaneously dealing with a Supreme Court rebuke on tariffs and intensifying technology competition with China tells you something about the number of crises on Washington's plate right now.
And let's be direct about what's at stake for ordinary people in the region. When we talk about embassy evacuations, we're talking about bureaucratic and diplomatic maneuvering. But the underlying reality is that civilians, Palestinian and Israeli alike, are living under conditions that the world's most powerful government considers too dangerous for its own employees. That disparity between the people who can leave and the people who cannot deserves our attention.
Absolutely. The human cost of geopolitical maneuvering is always the story beneath the story. And the energy markets are already pricing in increased risk. Oil futures have been volatile, and any further escalation could push prices higher, which directly impacts American consumers at the gas pump. It's all connected, Maya. Tariffs, energy competition, regional instability. These aren't separate stories. They're different chapters of the same book.
That's a perfect segue, because I want to connect this to the broader pattern we're seeing tonight. The United States is simultaneously facing a legal crisis over trade authority, a technological challenge from China in the energy sector, and growing instability in the Middle East. Each of these puts pressure on energy prices, energy security, and the energy transition. And the decisions being made right now, in courtrooms, in laboratories, in embassies, will determine the energy landscape for decades to come.
Now, let's turn to a story that might seem removed from the energy beat but has significant implications for regional security and, by extension, energy markets in East Asia. North Korea's ruling party recently held a top-level Congress, and what emerged from it has analysts buzzing about succession plans within the Kim dynasty.
Reporting from The Guardian lays out a fascinating picture, Alex. The Congress included the predictable boasts about unstoppable nuclear development, but the real headline was what it revealed about Kim Jong-un's succession planning. His daughter, Kim Jong-un, has been increasingly prominent at official events, and many observers now believe Kim has decided she will succeed him. If true, this would be a historic shift in one of the world's most secretive and patriarchal regimes.
Let's unpack why this matters beyond the palace intrigue. North Korea sits at the intersection of some of the world's most important energy and security dynamics. The Korean peninsula borders China, and any instability in North Korea affects China's strategic calculations. It affects South Korea, which is a major energy consumer and technology hub. It affects Japan. It affects the entire security architecture of the Pacific.
And there's a direct energy connection here. Kim Jong-un reportedly suggested during the Congress that North Korea and the United States could get along, provided Washington recognized North Korea on its terms. Any diplomatic opening with North Korea has implications for sanctions, and sanctions directly affect energy flows in the region. North Korea has been involved in illicit oil transfers and coal exports for years, and the sanctions regime around those activities is a significant factor in regional energy markets.
The succession question also introduces long-term uncertainty. Kim Jong-un is believed to be in his early 40s, so succession isn't imminent. But the fact that he's already positioning his daughter tells us he's thinking about regime continuity. For energy planners and security analysts, the question is what kind of North Korea emerges in the next generation. Will it be more open? More isolated? More aggressive? The answer affects energy security calculations across East Asia.
And there are skeptics, Alex. Some analysts quoted in The Guardian's reporting point out that gender politics in North Korean society could block Kim Jong-un's path to power. North Korea remains deeply conservative and patriarchal. Whether the military establishment and party elites would accept a female supreme leader is an open question. If there's a succession crisis down the road, That's the kind of instability that sends shockwaves through regional markets.
It's worth noting that this story also connects to the China dynamic we've been discussing all evening. China is North Korea's primary economic lifeline. Beijing's relationship with Pyongyang is a critical factor in everything from sanctions enforcement to regional stability. As China makes strategic gains in battery technology and navigates the tariff landscape with the US, its management of the North Korea relationship is another piece of this complex geopolitical puzzle.
Now, Alex, we've got one more story tonight, and I want to spend some time on it because it represents the kind of fundamental research that doesn't make headlines but quietly shapes our understanding of the universe and, ultimately, our technological capabilities.
This one is for the science lovers in our audience. A new paper published on AR14 examines what's called coherent elastic neutrino nucleus scattering, or CEvNS. The researchers are conducting a detector-level assessment of alternative target nuclei for CEvNS experiments under realistic experimental conditions. Now, I know that's a mouthful, so Maya, help us understand why this matters.
Let me break this down. Neutrinos are among the most abundant particles in the universe, but they're incredibly difficult to detect because they barely interact with other matter. CEvNS is a process where a neutrino scatters off an entire atomic nucleus coherently, meaning the nucleus acts as a single unit. This was first predicted decades ago but only confirmed experimentally in 2017. It's a very sensitive probe of neutrino interactions at low momentum transfer.
And this new research is significant because it's looking at the practical, real-world challenges of detecting these events. The paper focuses on detector-related effects like energy threshold, resolution, noise, and event selection criteria. In other words, the researchers aren't just doing theoretical physics. They're figuring out how to actually build better detectors that can observe these interactions under realistic conditions.
Here's why this connects to the energy story, and I think this is an underappreciated link. Neutrino physics has direct applications in nuclear energy monitoring. Neutrino detectors can be used to monitor nuclear reactors from a distance, verifying whether a reactor is operating and what kind of fuel it's using without physical inspections. This has enormous implications for nuclear non-proliferation, which circles back to our North Korea story.
That's a brilliant connection, Maya. If you can monitor a nuclear facility using neutrino detectors, you don't need inspectors on the ground. You don't need cooperative agreements. You can potentially verify compliance with nuclear agreements remotely. For a regime like North Korea, which has consistently blocked international inspectors, this kind of technology could be transformative for verification and arms control.
The research also has implications for our understanding of fundamental physics, which in turn drives technological innovation. Every major energy technology we have, from nuclear power to solar cells to batteries, traces its origins to fundamental physics research. The scientists working on CEvNS aren't trying to build a better battery. But the knowledge they generate feeds into the broader scientific ecosystem that eventually produces breakthroughs like the one we discussed earlier from China.
And let's note the importance of keeping this kind of basic research funded and supported. In an era of budget cuts and political pressure to show immediate returns on investment, fundamental physics research often gets squeezed. But history tells us again and again that the most transformative technologies come from research that had no obvious commercial application at the time it was conducted.
The specific focus on alternative target nuclei is also worth highlighting. The researchers are essentially testing different materials to see which ones give the best results for detecting neutrino scattering. This kind of methodical, systematic work doesn't generate flashy headlines, but it's the backbone of scientific progress. It's how we build the foundation for the next generation of detectors, which could have applications in energy, security, and medicine.
Alright, Maya, let's step back and connect all of tonight's stories, because the pattern here is striking and it tells us something important about where the world is heading.
Let's start with the thread that runs through everything we've covered tonight, the global competition for energy dominance. The tariff ruling reshapes trade flows, including the flow of energy technology components. The Chinese battery breakthrough could accelerate the EV revolution and shift the clean energy balance of power. The Jerusalem embassy drawdown signals instability in the world's most important oil-producing region. North Korea's succession drama affects security in an energy-critical part of Asia. And the neutrino research could transform how we monitor nuclear energy and weapons programs.
What we're seeing is a world in transition, and the transition is messy. The old order, built on fossil fuels, dollar-denominated trade, and American military supremacy, is being challenged on multiple fronts simultaneously. China is challenging it technologically with batteries. The Supreme Court is challenging executive authority on trade. Regional conflicts are challenging the stability that energy markets depend on. And fundamental science is quietly creating the tools that will define whatever comes next.
And here's what concerns me, Alex. The United States is playing defense on too many fronts at once. The tariff strategy just got kneecapped by the courts. The battery technology race is tilting toward China. Diplomatic posture in the Middle East is defensive. And fundamental research funding is always under threat. If you're looking at this from Beijing, you see a competitor that's distracted and constrained. If you're looking at it from Washington, you should be alarmed.
But let's also be honest about the opportunity here. The Supreme Court ruling, while a setback for the administration, is the system working. Checks and balances exist for a reason. The tariff approach was legally questionable, and the court said so. Now there's an opportunity to build a trade policy that has actual legislative backing, that's been debated and refined through the democratic process. That could produce a stronger, more sustainable approach than executive action ever could.
I agree, and the same is true for the energy transition. Yes, China is making breakthroughs in battery technology. But competition drives innovation. American researchers, American companies, American entrepreneurs now have even more incentive to push the boundaries of what's possible. The question is whether they'll get the support and the policy framework they need to compete effectively.
And for our audience, here's the bottom line. Every story we covered tonight affects the energy you use, the prices you pay, and the world your children will inherit. The tariff ruling affects the cost of goods in your home. The battery breakthrough affects when and whether you'll switch to an electric vehicle. The Middle East situation affects gas prices. These aren't abstract geopolitical stories. They're your story.
And that's why we do this show. Not to just recite headlines, but to connect the dots, to show you how the decisions being made in courtrooms and laboratories and embassies and party congresses around the world are shaping the energy future that all of us share. Knowledge is power, and in this case, understanding energy is understanding power in every sense of the word.
Well said, Maya. Before we go, I want to remind our viewers to stay informed, stay engaged, and stay skeptical. Question everything, including us. Go read the sources we've cited tonight, the South China Morning Post, The Guardian, Middle East Eye, the AR-14 preprint. Do your own research. Draw your own conclusions. That's what an informed citizenry looks like.
And remember, the stories we covered tonight are still developing. The tariff situation will evolve as Congress and the White House respond to the court ruling. The battery research will move from laboratory to testing to, potentially, commercial production. The security situation in Jerusalem could escalate or stabilize. We'll be here to cover all of it as it unfolds.
For Truth Report, I'm Alex Truth.
And I'm Maya Clarity. Stay vigilant, stay curious, and we'll see you next time.
Good night.